Happy Friday, everybody. We are at the end of our week, and here we have our first chapter Fridays, the first edition, no pun intended, for spring semester. So let's get into it, shall we? The book that we are going to be taking a look at today is called Code Talkers, and it is historical fiction. So yes, the events described herein are true, but the characters are unique and changed and all those sorts of things, but based on the actual experiences of real people. So it's kind of cool to read historical fiction sometimes because you go, hey, I'm learning a lot about this event or about this time period, but yeah, the characters weren't actual people during that time period. Okay? Alrighty, let's take a look. So this is by Joseph Bruchac, I believe you would say his name is, and we see a pair of dog tags here. So right off the bat, we might start wondering what this is going to be about. And if you know about World War II history, you know that the Navajo language was used as a code that was never cracked by the Germans. So it's a novel about the Navajo Marines of World War II. Navajos Wanted. Grandchildren, you asked me about this medal of mine. There is much to be said about it. This small piece of metal holds a story that I was not allowed to speak for many winters. It is the true story of how Navajo Marines helped America win a great war. There is much that I must remember to speak for this medal, to tell its story as it should be told. I must remember not only the great secret with which I was trusted, but also all that happened to me and those like me. That is a lot. But I think that I can do it well enough. After all, I was expected to remember, as were the other men trained with me. The lives of many men depended entirely on our memories. And just a moment for the dedication here. So this book is dedicated to those who have always, in proportion to their population, volunteered in the greatest numbers, suffered the most casualties, won the most Purple Hearts and decorations for valor, and served loyally in every war fought by the United States against foreign enemies, from the American Revolution to Afghanistan and Iraq, to the American Indian soldier. Okay, so this part here we have actually read. It was a little excerpt that was pulled out that we just read previously. So we're going to pick up right here. This is the grandfather speaking. Look here. The man you see riding a horse on the back of this medal was an Indian. He is also one of those raising that flag there behind him. I knew him when we were both young men. His name was Ira Hayes. He was a fine person, even though he was not one of our people, but Akimel Oodam, a Pima Indian. We both fought on a distant island far off in the Pacific Ocean. There was smoke all around us from the exploding shells, the snapping sound of Japanese .25 caliber rifles, the thumping of mortars, and the rattling of machine guns. We could hear the pitiful cries of wounded men, our own Marines, and the enemy soldiers too. It was a terrible battle, but our men were determined as they struggled up that little mountain. On top of it is where Ira was photographed, raising the flag of Nihima. I was not one of those who fought to the top of Mount Suribachi, but I had my own special part to play. I helped send the message about our success, about the brave deeds so many Marines did that day for Nihima. Nihima, our mother. That is the Navajo word we chose to mean our country, this United States. It was a good name to use. When we Indians fought on those far-off islands, we always kept the thought in our minds that we were defending our mother, the sacred land that sustains us. Nihima is only one of the Navajo words we chose for places with, pardon me if I ruin these words, Bilagana names. South America became Sha'dea Nihima, our mother to the south. Alaska we called Bihai, with winter. Because we knew that Britain is an island, we gave it the name of Tota, surrounded by water. When we did not know much about a place, we described something about the people there. So we named Germany Bishai, iron hat, and Japan was Bina Adalts Ozi, slant-eyed. Sometimes we didn't know much about either the country or the people there, but that did not stop us. We used our sense of humor and played with the English. The word we used for Spain was dibedin, which means sheep pain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I have not even explained to you yet why we made up such names. I have not told you why being able to speak our Navajo language, the same Navajo language they tried to beat out of me when I was a child, was so important during World War II. It was because I was a Navajo code talker. What was a code talker, and what did we code talkers do? Why was the secret we shared so great that we could not tell even our families about it until long after the war ended? You cannot weave a rug before you set up the loom. So I will go back to the beginning, pound the posts in the ground, and build the frame. I will start where my own story of words and warriors begins. Chapter 1, Sent Away. I was only 6 years old, and I was worried. I sat behind our hogan, leaning against its familiar walls and looking up toward the mesa. I hoped I would see an eagle, for that would be a good sign. I also hoped I would not hear anyone call my name, for that would be a sign of something else entirely. But the eagle did not appear. Instead, my mother's voice, not much louder than a whisper, broke the silence. Kiasi, come. Your uncle is in the wagon. The moment I dreaded had arrived. I stood and looked toward the hills. I could run up there and hide, but I did not do so, for I had always obeyed my mother, whose love for me was as certain as the firmness of the sacred earth beneath my moccasins. However, I did drag my feet as I came out from behind our hogan to see what I knew I would see. There stood my tall, beautiful mother. Her thick black hair was tied up into a bun. She was dressed in her finest clothing, a new silky blue blouse and a blue pleated skirt decorated with bands of gold ribbons. On her feet were soft calf-high moccasins, and she wore all her silver and turquoise jewelry. Her squash blossom necklace, her bracelets, her concha belt, her earrings. I knew she had adorned herself with all of these things for me. She wanted me to have this image of her to keep in my mind, to be with me when I was far away from home. However, the thing I saw most clearly was what she held in her arms. It was a small bundle of my clothes tied in a blanket. My heart sank. I really was going to be sent away. My mother motioned toward the door of our hogan, and I went inside. My great-grandfather was waiting for me on his bed. He was too weak to walk and was so old that he had shrunk in size. He had never been a big man, but now he was almost as small as me. Great-grandfather took my hand in both of his. Be strong, Kiyazi, he rasped, his voice as creaky as an old saddle. I stood up on my toes so that I could put my arm around his neck, and then pressed my cheek against his leathery face. Kiyazi, he said again, patting my back, our dear little boy. I had always been small for my age. My father used to tease me about it, saying that when I was born, he made my cradle board out of the handle of a wooden spoon. My baby name was Awiyazi, little baby. Little I was and little I stayed. I went from being Awiyazi, little baby, to Kiyazi, little boy. You are small, my grandfather said, as if he could hear what I was thinking. But your heart is large. You will do your best. I nodded. When I stepped outside, my mother bent down and embraced me much harder than my grandfather had hugged me. Then she stepped back to stand by the door of our hogan. Travel safely, my son, Mother said. Her voice was so sad. My father came up to me and put his broad, calloused hands on my shoulders. He, too, was wearing his best clothing and jewelry. Though he said nothing, I think Father was even sadder than my mother, so sad that words failed him. He was shorter than her, but he was very strong and always stood so straight that he seemed tall as a lodgepole pine to me. His eyes were moist as he lifted me up to the wagon seat and then nodded. My uncle clucked to the horses and shook the reins. The wagon lurched forward. As I grabbed the wooden backboard to steady myself, I felt a splinter go into my finger from the rough wood, but I ignored the pain. Instead, I pulled myself around to turn backward and wave to my parents. I kept waving even after we went around the sagebrush-covered hill, and I could no longer see them waving back at me. My father with his back straight and his hand held high, my mother with one hand pressed to her lips, while the other floated as gracefully as a butterfly. I did not know it, but it would be quite some time before I saw my home again. Man, that is so sad. So my guess is that he may be headed to a boarding school. I don't know. You would have to continue to read on. You guys have a copy of the PDF if you're interested. Also, you can always ask your English teacher to help you locate this book and actively learn, and you can continue reading on. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful Friday.